Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a respected and well known author from Buenos Aires, Argentina, Mr. William Gadea. William, welcome to the show.
Ashutosh, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. William is the author of a book titled Arrow, The Power and Poison of Story. He is a Peruvian American author, a filmmaker, and a Zen practitioner. So, William, I'm going to ask you about your book, but before that, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Sure. I grew up all around the world. I was born in Peru. When I was 7, my family moved to Australia looking for more promising horizons. And then when I was 14, we moved again to the Dominican Republic.
Hmm.
I went to study film at New York University. And I've lived in the United States for most of my life, but
Wow,
about 5 years ago, I came down here to Buenos Aires, and my wife and I really loved the city, so we just sort of stayed here.
absolutely. So, tell me about your book, Arrow, The Power and Poison of Story. What first inspired you to explore the double-edged nature of story, the power and the poison?
Well, when I first started practicing Zen about 18 years ago now,
Hmm.
the same thing happened to me as happens to everyone that tries to sit on the cushion and quiet their mind. All these distractions came rushing into my head,
Hmm.
and they were things like, "Oh, what am I going to do after the session is over?" or "When is the bell going to ring?" etc.
Hmm.
So I kind of became obsessed with these distractions.
Hmm.
Why is it that it's so hard to just concentrate on your breath? Why
Hmm.
is it so hard to quiet the mind? And that began a whole exploration of neuroscience, psychology, the Buddhist tradition, evolutionary studies, to just understand why we are always storifying in our head.
Hmm. Amazing. And why did you choose the title Arrow? What does the metaphor mean to you?
Well, that refers to an old Buddhist story.
Hmm.
Malunkya was one of the monks in the Buddha's monastery.
Hmm.
And Malunkya, like me, was a little bit of an intellectual. So
Hmm.
he goes to the Buddha and he says to the Buddha, Buddha, I have lots of these metaphysical questions in my head and I can't get them out. If you don't give me the answer to these questions, I'm going to just leave this monastery. And of course, the Buddha is a little bit ticked off by that.
Hmm.
And he says, Malunkya, did I ever promise that I would answer these questions? And Malunkya says, yes, you're right. You didn't promise. And then he introduces a metaphor to explain why he doesn't deal with these
Hmm.
metaphors, with these, issues. He says, if your skin was pierced by a poison arrow,
Hmm.
what would we do? Would we be worrying about what the materials the arrow is made out of or its aerodynamic qualities or what sort of bow it came from?
Hmm.
No, we'd just be trying to suck out the poison.
Hmm.
And that's what I'm trying to do with you. I'm trying to provide you with a liberation, trying to suck out the poison.
Hmm.
And I suppose what I wanted to do with this book is sort of extend that metaphor. An arrow is also like a story. It
Correct.
has a beginning, it has a middle, it
Hmm.
has an end. It travels through the air quickly. It can carry messages, it can carry fire, it can carry poison. And for me, an arrow is is like a story. And I guess I agree with the Buddha.
Hmm.
It
Amazing.
the getting the poison out is
Yeah,
important.
correct.
But on the other hand, I'm a little bit of an unrepentant Malunkya in the
Hmm.
sense that I also want to find the answer to those questions.
Yeah.
I want to understand the diagnosis of the human condition.
Hmm.
So that has been
Fascinating.
my
What a great
journey.
response. You call story our superpower and our greatest vulnerability.
Yes.
Again, a very interesting contradiction of a superpower and being vulnerable. Help me
Yes,
understand this paradox.
absolutely. Story has always been the conductive wire by which we transmit culture in our society, right? Because a story is just a causative chain of events or a representation of a
Mm,
causative chain of events. So they that word causative, if we can kind of understand the story, we can understand a little bit better about how the world works.
mm,
So, so people have always used it to try to persuade others. Like a warlord is going to have a story about grievance to persuade the people to go to war, or a
mm,
statement is going to have a story about the identity and destiny of a people to bring their people together, or an entrepreneur is going to have a story about how this product is going to solve your problems.
mm,
So it's been what has given us the power to really change the world,
mm,
stories. But at the same time, somewhere along the way, the teller became the tale,
mm,
and we became these stories, this narrative structure
mm,
that explains our past, integrates our present,
mm,
and predicts our future.
mm,
And the bad part of that is that when we don't live up to the stories, we become depressed, we become anxious, we don't live in the moment. We're
mm,
living in the story instead of the moment.
mm.
So I guess I don't want to persuade people to lose their stories because I'm
Correct.
not even sure that's possible.
Absolutely.
But I want us to kind of remember that they're stories.
Absolutely.
Let them remember that these are just mental constructs.
Correct. Correct. And William, how does the Buddhist view of the self as an illusion interact with your ideas about story?
Well, I think it's very much in the same vein. Perhaps we use different words. The first two noble truths that the Buddha had was one that life is dukkha, which is dissatisfaction, and
Mm,
it's that way because of upadana, which is attachments.
mm,
And for me, the stories are the attachments. The stories we tell are the things that drive us to dissatisfaction.
mm, mm. What role does imagination play in human progress, as per your research?
Well, we are always rejiggering our memories and our stories, and that is what lets us create new things, right? And when we are, say, in a dining room table, where we're telling stories to each other to form bonds. When we're trying to relax, we might turn on Netflix
Mm,
and see some movies and their imaginative reworkings. And for me, the imagination is the way to rejigger those stories into
mm,
new patterns so that we can perhaps imagine a better life for ourselves.
mm.
It's very
Yeah,
important, and it's part of us too.
very well said. But in an age of data and algorithms, is story still humanity's most persuasive force?
I think it is, but in this age, perhaps we're a little drowning in stories,
Mm,
if you imagine what it must have been like to be living in our ancestral environment,
mm,
perhaps we form an alliance with somebody in our tribe, and that gives us a hit of dopamine, and we feel good, and we've improved our situation, right? Because it's
mm,
good to have allies. Um, but on the other hand, when we're on Twitter, we're getting these likes and we're getting these dopamine
mm.
hits, but it's like 10 a minute. And it just kind of, for me, it sort of scrambles my head a little
Yeah.
bit, and it leaves this sort of cognitive residue
Mm,
that leaves me a little bit sad. So
mm,
I think the story horizon that we had, back in our ancestral environment is
Mm.
completely different from the one we have now.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like sugar, right? It was fine to crave sugar when we were in the savannas, but now, when sugar is super refined,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more problematic. I think it's
Mm.
the same way with social media,
Yeah.
and it makes me a little bit sad that it's
Mm.
so, but it's here to stay, right?
Correct. Correct.
We can't get rid of it.
Correct. You
Yeah.
also argue that story can mislead and poison. What forms does this poison take today? Political, digital, or personal?
Well, I think there are. I guess I would love it if all our stories were unifying stories and
Mm.
universal stories. But a lot of the time, the stories we tell are tribalized stories, and they're telling us, why the group of people that we belong to are better than some other group of people.
Mm.
And that becomes very toxic, I think, in politics and religion, etc. So I would love it if our stories were a little bit more broadly human as opposed
Mm.
to tribal. I think that is something that's bothering me about the world right now.
Mm. And are there any signs that a story has started to turn toxic? And if so, can we detoxify harmful narratives without losing the meaning of the story?
I think when we're thinking about our own stories, the way I try to quieten them, and perhaps not quieten them, contextualize them
Mhm.
and achieve some sort of distance from them, is with a meditation practice, sitting down at my cushion every morning or afternoon, and just concentrating on my breath and letting those stories atrophy a little bit. But you, they're still there.
Mm.
If I'm feel that I've not reaching my full potential, then I might start getting this feeling of anxiety or depression, and that's there for a reason.
Mm.
It's there to give you some information. It's driving us forward, but
Mm.
at the same time, it can also get in our way.
Yeah.
It can impede us,
Mhm.
and make us unhappy. So,
Right.
my practice is about trying to get some kind of distance from that.
Mm. And what practices can help people loosen their attachment to self stories without becoming detached from life?
Well, I think there are very many ways to do that. The way I do it is with meditation,
Yeah.
but I will acknowledge that meditation is perhaps not for everyone.
Mm.
And you're speaking to me from India. One
Yeah.
of the reasons I admire the Hindu tradition is because it's not unimodal, right? It's
Correct.
got these four different paths, and I feel that is very sensible.
Yeah.
And it actually, even though Hinduism is the oldest, one of the major religions, it feels very modern to
Cor-
me. You
Correct.
know, in a way, very individualistic. In a way, everybody is a seeker, and and the sense that these modes are sort of uh, different ways of going up the same mountain.
Correct.
So
Correct.
I I I don't want to impose my way on other people.
Yeah.
I think we all have to find our own path, and
Correct.
uh, you know when I if a Martian came to my Zendo and went to Roman Catholic service, I think they would be really they would be really struck by the similarities. we're all chanting, we're kneeling, we're doing this, which, in the Roman Catholic tradition they call orans, and
Mm.
in our tradition we call gasho.
Yeah,
Uh, we have candles, we have incense, we have an altar, we have sculptures, we have. It's so similar
yeah.
that it makes me suspect we're trying to do the same thing.
Mm.
And but on the other hand, what's going on in our heads is different, right?
Correct, correct.
They're worshiping a god, and I'm concentrating on my breath, or what's happening right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
So it just seems to me that we need to kind of make space for multiple
absolutely.
modes, like you have in Hinduism.
Correct. Well, absolutely, absolutely. Hinduism, in fact, permits you to follow whichever path you want to take.
Mm,
So I agree with you. But
yeah.
coming back, my next question for you, William, is how does the Buddhist concept of non-self relate with the neuroscientific idea of the constructed self?
Well, I think there's been a very a confluence between neuroscience and Buddhism. And one really interesting experiment that I talk about in my book,
Mm,
they put people in fMRI machines that are
mm,
actually able to track the blood flow in the brain and tell you where the activity is going.
mm,
And they asked them to press a button, either left button or the right button with their index finger. And these people made a judgment at random as to which button to press.
mm,
And they reported back because they're showing them like some letters, and they reported back when they made this choice, right?
mm,
And what was amazing was that the scientists could predict seconds before the person knew what button they were going to press,
mm,
what button they were going to press.
mm,
So it seems like what the neuroscientists tell us is
mm,
that the it's what I call the deluded monarch, that we have
mm,
somebody in our head that we think is making all these decisions,
mm.
that we think is the center for consciousness, but really there's something else going on under the hood
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
is making the decisions,
Mm,
and just sort of thinking that
mm.
they're the king when really it's some sort of parliament of mind
Correct,
making the decision behind the curtains.
correct. Well said.
Yeah.
Do you see enlightenment as the ultimate story-free state or simply a wiser way of telling stories?
Well, in my Zen tradition, we're not very fond of the word enlightenment. If you go
Mm,
to a teacher and you say, "Teacher, how can I get enlightened?" They're going to tell you, "Well, you're already enlightened just if
correct.
you choose to sit on the cushion, or you're already enlightened even before then." So, um, I I'm not sure that that is becoming obsessed with that end
Mm,
state. It's almost creates more attachment, right? Because
mm,
you're going saying, "Oh, I'm sitting on my cushion, and pretty soon I'm going to be enlightened." It's another story you're telling that is kind of creating a little bit of that upadana, that attachment, right? So we are not fond of the word enlightenment. Having said that, to answer the second part of your question,
mm,
I I feel it's more about getting some context on your stories,
mm,
getting a little bit of distance from them,
mm.
rather than getting rid of them altogether. And I'm not
Yeah,
sure, getting rid of them altogether is even possible.
correct, correct. How did you balance science, philosophy, and your memoir in Arrow without letting one overwhelm the other?
Well, I think for me, it was very much a matter of um, just trying to write the book that only I could write,
Correct.
because if I tried to pretend that I was an academic and wrote it as an academic with the careful citations and the dryness and the objectiveness. I think other people could probably write that book better than me.
Mm,
But, if I can actually bring my own life experience into it and take a sort of a multidisciplinary approach, bring different facets of the thinking that I've become acquainted with into it,
mm,
then I feel like I could write something that would be a little bit more unique and perhaps a little bit more accessible to
mm,
other people too.
Amazing. I have time for two more questions for you.
Okay.
If storytelling defines humanity, what happens when artificial intelligence begins start telling stories?
Yes, it's it's fascinating to me what is going on with artificial intelligence.
Mm,
In one sense, it makes it a little bit harder to disbelieve the physicalist story, right?
mm, mm,
Because these machines are able to create things that we would undoubtedly call creative if they came from human beings.
mm,
They're able to create images that we would undoubtedly call creative if they came from human beings. They have a relational activity. People are calling AIs their best friends, their
yeah.
lovers, and that is scary. But it also shows you that there's this capacity there, and
Mm,
it makes me think that when you combine this also with what neuroscientists have
mm,
been discovering,
mm,
that this brain is just a biological machine, that our mind is a biological machine. And I think the way I'd like to see it is that really we're part of a bigger brain, that
mm,
we're all neurons in a bigger brain.
mm.
And uh, we perhaps can identify with that broader, bigger brain,
Mm.
and in that sense, perhaps large language models are a metaphor for what already exists,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
They're basically just a reflection of our
correct,
culture.
correct.
They've made it more efficient,
Yeah,
but they're making all these connections that we used to be making, right?
correct.
So that's a place I'd like to take it.
Absolutely. And my last question for you, William. What single lesson or practice would you like listeners to take away to make them steadier, stronger, more connected, and more content, to quote you, as you write?
Well, as I said before, I don't want to impose a path onto anyone. I think
Mm,
you have to discover your own path.
mm,
But for me, it's definitely been a practice of meditation, of sitting down, and
mm,
the way we meditate in the Zen tradition, we usually start with counting breaths. Then we might go to just paying attention to the breath.
mm.
And then after that, it's not that it's more advanced, but it's just
Yeah,
the next step usually is what they call shinkantaza, which is just paying attention to what's happening.
correct.
Um, and to be able to just touch ground
Mm,
every day and see what is going on in your mind and in your soul and in your emotions, and just check in. It's very centering,
mm.
and it just makes the rest of your life a lot easier and more pleasant.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And on that note, William, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been. You took me
Thank you.
back to so many new things that I keep learning, reading, and writing myself. And, you seem to have done a lot of work on Buddhism. And it's amazing how you've connected so many different cultures using the power of our scriptures to be able to really get your message across. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Ashutosh. Good luck to you too.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.